Okay, so we've all seen this familiar alert. Either your car will actually tell you tire pressure too low, or you'll see this little symbol right here. So it means we've got our flat tire. We gotta figure out which one that is. Okay, first of all, before we start checking all of our tire pressures to see which one's the low one, we're gonna want to look for our sticker on our inner door here that tells us what our tire pressure should be. Right here it says 33 psi. Sometimes the front is different than the back, but on this car it's all the same. Sometimes the sticker is located on the inner part of the door right here, but it's always on the driver's side door. Alright, so for this tire we're at about 16-17 psi. It doesn't really look flat, but sometimes that can be the case. The only time a lot of these lower profile tires start to look flat is when they get about 5 to 7 psi. So let's go ahead and put on the spare. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is come into your trunk, lift up the undercover, get your spare tire. It's usually held on by a plastic twist cap right like this. Sometimes the tire can be underneath the car. You're also going to want to look for your lug wrench out in your car. Here's mine. As you can see, it's pretty small compared to my arm. Barely makes it up to my elbow. One thing you might want to invest in is an extended breaker bar. You can just go to the auto parts store and get that. That'll give you a lot more leverage on the lug nuts and make this job a whole lot easier if you ever get into this situation. Okay, so as you can see, my car has these lug nut covers. They're just plastic things you can pull off with a little hooked thing like this or a screwdriver. It's a lot easier if you have a hook. If you have these covers, I would recommend adding this to your toolkit. As you can see, these just pull off. This is what they normally look like, and your lugs are exposed. Okay, so what you're going to want to do now, before the car is in the air, before you jack it up, you're going to want to break loose all of the nuts, because if you don't do that, the wheel will be able to spin freely once it's in the air, and it's going to be nearly impossible to lean into the wrench and break the nuts free. So let's go ahead and do that. Angle the wrench so that when it goes to the left, lefty-loosey, you can push on it by stepping on it and break it off. There we go. So now we have all the lugs broken loose. So now we can jack up the car. Okay, so this is the first most important thing you're going to learn about changing the tire, is finding the correct lift point for the jack to go onto. Sometimes this thing that's plastic on my car can be metal, and a lot of people want to try to just stick the jack anywhere on this. If that happens, this is going to bend, break, and the jack's going to slip out from the car and you can drop the car on yourself. Or after the wheels come off, drop the car on the ground, and that is not going to be pretty. So on these cars there's a subframe. As you can see, there's a strips of metal that are exposed. Right here is where the jack's going to want to go. Usually it's about 6 inches to a foot away from the tire in either direction. Same goes for the front. A lot of times it sticks down and is way more reinforced than the rest of the subframe. Since here, right here, this little rectangle that comes down in the front is where the jack needs to go. All the rest of this is just plastic. Here's an example of a car that has metal going all the way across the strip. And the lift points are slightly different. They don't come down normally, but there's a reinforced thicker piece of metal right here that has a notch in it. And again, it's about a foot away from the tire. There's even a little arrow right there. What you're gonna wanna make sure is always look for the part with the thickest, most exposed metal. Usually it's pretty easy to find. You always want to just make sure it's connected right in that slot on that reinforced piece of metal. All right, we're gonna go ahead and continue jacking up the car. Let's go ahead and get our already loosened lug nuts and twist this thing off. Okay, so you can see as I loosen this, the wheel is gonna want to fall off. It's already wobbling a lot because the screw's almost out. Like I said earlier, on a car that has the screws that come out of it, the wheel would be resting on all 5 of these, and you could just pull it off when you're ready. But this one, you got to be pushing it in with your foot here and holding it, otherwise it'll drop off. As you can see, I'm holding the wheel with my foot and my left hand to keep it from falling out because I have the non-traditional lug bolts. Okay, I'm still holding the wheel. And now, you don't want to put your hand underneath it because if you drop it, you're going to crush your fingers. So just lift it out, scoot it with your foot, and let it just roll off. Alright, and there we go, our wheel's off. So this picture is an example of what traditional lug nut wheel hubs look like. As you can see, these bolts would hold the wheel on after the nuts already come out. Okay, now it's time to get our spare on. We're just going to want to roll it over. And since we didn't make the car too high, we're not really going to have to lift it. Just scoot it up. We are going to have to lift it a slight amount because the spare is usually a bit lower than the normal car. It's a bit smaller of a wheel. So you want to lift it up with both hands. Put your foot under it because the spare is not usually that heavy. And scoot it forward to lift it on. Alright, this is on. We got to keep putting pressure at the bottom here and the top. Hold it with your foot or you put the first nut in to make sure it doesn't fall. Sometimes you kind of got to wiggle it to get the holes aligned. Right now you're going to want to do an initial tightening, just enough where you can hold the wheel and get them enough on there so that when you put the weight down of the car, it's not going to come off. And here we go, we're going to lower our car now. Okay, so the next most important thing, you're going to want to tighten these up in a star pattern. I've already tightened all mine, but what you're going to want to do is go from whichever one you start on, let's say this one, tighten the next furthest away, which could be either of these two. I'm just going to say this one. Tighten this as much as you can. The next furthest away one is this one. Tighten that, then this one, then this one. It makes a star. The reason this is important is because if you were to tighten across like this and then leave this last one, the wheel could be at an angle and this one could not actually be all the way in. But because these are already tight, this one could seem like it's tight. And eventually, this wheel could wobble loose again. So going across each way ensures that each side is evenly pressed down. For good measure, I ensure stepping on each of them, again on the star pattern, just to make sure it's nice and tight on there. Then we can go ahead and release our jack. And we're done. Let's get the heck out of here, guys.